1 gram of crystalline botulinum toxin can theoretically kill 1 million people. Whoa, 1 gram.
The information shared on the Rethink It podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. While Dr. Sande is a licensed medical provider, the content of this podcast is not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis, treatment, or advice specific to your individual health needs. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health or medical care.
Welcome back to the Rethink It podcast, the podcast where we challenge what you think you know about brain health, longevity, and healing. We are not here to chase symptoms or hand out quick fix Band-Aids. We're here to ask better questions, rethink pharmaceuticals as the first choice, explore cutting-edge natural science, and most importantly, empower you to partner with your body's natural healing wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Sande, and today we are diving into a topic that has been lighting up my inbox and certainly popping up a little bit on social media, although it may make you a little uncomfortable, especially if you love looking young and working on anti-aging and using Botox to do it. So we are talking about Botox and brain health. And here is why this conversation matters more now than ever. So let's start with some statistics, some numbers that may shock you. In 2023, nearly 9 million Botox procedures were performed globally. That's up from 6.2 million just 2 years ago. In the United States, we're talking about 4.7 million procedures in 2023. And that number is projected to hit about 5 million in 2024. To put this into perspective, that is a 460% increase since 2000, the year 2000. We're talking about $6.7 billion in a market. This is a $6.7 billion global market that is expected to balloon to about $11 billion in 2031. Whoa. But here's what's really concerning. This isn't just about wealthy celebrities anymore. I know so many of my colleagues who are doing Botox as a side business. The average age for a Botox user is around 43. But the kicker about this is 24% of the users are now between 19 and 34. I would be lying if I didn't tell you that I had tried Botox at one point or another in my early 30s. So I am not terribly surprised by this number. Guilty here, okay? But what we're seeing is a preventative Botox that's becoming very normalized in this Gen Z and millennial generation. So while listeners might be asking me, is my quarterly Botox affecting my brain fog, or could my forehead injections be impacting my memory? These are not fringe concerns anymore. We're talking about millions of people who honestly deserve some science-backed answers. Not fear-mongering, science, okay? So what are we actually injecting? Before we dive into the brain connection with Botox, let's get real clear about what Botox actually is. Botox, or let me see if I can say this name, it's onobotulinum toxin A. Okay, it's derived from a bacterium called Clostridium botulinum. This is the same toxin that causes botulism, which the CDC classifies as one of the most lethal substances known in science. Whoa. To put this into a little bit more of a context for you, 1 gram of crystalline botulinum toxin can theoretically kill 1 million people. Whoa, 1 gram. So now obviously cosmetic doses are much lower than a gram of botulinum toxin. We're talking about nanograms, not grams. But here's what's crucial to understand. Botox works by blocking something called acetylcholine, which is released at the neuromuscular junction of the muscles, okay? And so where the neurons connect with the muscles, and it blocks the release of this acetylcholine, which leads to paralysis of the targeted muscles. Okay, and that's where it prevents nerve signals from reaching those muscles and then the movement of those muscles, which is why you get a nice flat forehead, right? And here's what some people don't know. The FDA actually labels Botox with a black box warning. It's their strongest safety warning, as we know, as you've heard me say in the Ozempic podcast. There's black box warnings. They're a big deal when the FDA issues them. And this is their strongest safety warning. And they warn about the possible distant spread of the toxin effect with Botox. This can include things that result in like swallowing problems, breathing difficulties, and neurologic symptoms, especially when the dose is a little bit higher than expected or the product is used off-label. So this is not meant, like I said, to be fear-mongering. This is the FDA's own warning. So we're talking about whether or not Botox can affect the brain, and we're not starting from like Sandra's own opinion here. We're not starting from zero. The regulatory agencies already acknowledge that this toxin can have an effect beyond the injection site. Okay, so the brain connection and the way it matters, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the science and where it gets really interesting and quite frankly, in my opinion, a bit concerning. For years, the standard line has been, I'm sure you've heard it, that Botox stays local and it does not cross into the central nervous system. But that narrative is truly crumbling under the weight of new research. Let's walk through some of those, okay? We've got 3 pathways we're talking about. 3 pathways where it affects beyond the brain, the local area. So first pathway is the facial feedback and emotional processing. There is an interesting connection between that. When you paralyze frown muscles, you are not just smoothing out your wrinkles, you are actually changing how your brain processes emotions. Multiple neuroimaging studies, and we're talking about PET scans and things like that, MRIs, functional MRI scans, looked at this, including a fascinating study that was done in 2023 published in the journal Nature, showed that Botox injected into the glabellar region here, that's between your eyebrows right here. I have some 11s here. They can actually alter the amygdala activity on a functional MRI scan. Wow. The amygdala is a really important part of the brain. It's your brain's alarm center. So it's important for processing things like fear, stress, and emotional memory. So when you can't frown, your brain literally processes negative emotions differently. One study found that people that with Botox had a slower detection and processing of negative emotions. In other words, they could not identify when somebody was becoming angry. It took them statistically significantly longer to identify a change in emotion than the control group, which did not have Botox. I think it was something like 8 to 10 seconds longer, which doesn't seem like much, but it is. Imagine not being able to identify that somebody's getting mad at you and getting ready to protect yourself, right? That's a big deal. Now, this isn't necessarily cognition per se, but it is proof that the injection in your face could change how the brain functions. And that's where it gets concerning. We have no long-term studies that actually demonstrate what happens when you repetitively inject yourself with Botox and how that alters the emotional processing center of your brain if we do it for years and years and years, or even decades in some cases. You're starting at 19, potentially even decades. So the other area that gets impacted with Botox beyond your local area is the retrograde. There's a retrograde transport. Okay, this is proven in the studies, meaning we actually mobilize the toxin backwards from where it's injected toward the brain. So this is where things get real serious. In 2008, since 2008, okay, since 2008, we're talking about, holy smokes, 15, 16, 17 years, we've had solid evidence that the botulinum toxin doesn't just stay put where you inject it, it travels. a landmark study that was published in the Journal of Neuroscience actually showed that the catalytically active Botox is retrogradely transported by neurons and can actually reach the brain. Now, let me explain how this happens. So after injection, the toxin is taken up by the nerve endings that travel backward along nerve fibers. And it's like a car driving on a highway, reverse. Okay. It goes all the way to the spinal cord and the brain. Now, remember, these are nanogram doses. These are tiny doses. So we're not getting full body paralysis. And when you hear spinal cord and brain, I'm sure that's where you want to think. But it's microdosing. And so once it hits that spinal cord and brain area, it can cross synapses and affect the second order neurons, the ones that affect consciousness and processing. In 2024, there was a genome-wide study that found that Botox travels from the injection site to the neuron cell body, where the brain's Golgi apparatus, this doesn't sound like 8th grade, and then it's finally transported to the endoplasmic reticulum, that gooey stuff on the inside of your cell model, okay? But this is really important. It's not a theoretical thing. It's actually been observed and measurably it's an observed measurable transport. And the kicker was, in 2012, we found that it actually cleaved something called SNAP25, the protein that Botox targets, in the spinal cord after just a 5 unit per kilogram intramuscular injection. That is well within the range of a typical cosmetic dosing. So this is real for the dosing you're getting in cosmetic Botox. The third thing that it does in the nervous system that's really important to highlight is that it stimulates neuroinflammation and microglial activation. The microglia are just the immune cells of the brain, which they're there for a reason, but we don't want to activate them all the time. That leads to the same thing that happens in our body when we activate too much of our immune cells. What does that happen? What does that cause? It causes autoimmunity. So we can end up causing a similar type picture when we have inflammation, neuroinflammation triggered, as well as microglial activation. So here's where it gets real concerning. It would literally just came out in 2024. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin used a 3D human neuron glial model to study repeated Botox exposure. It's the kind of protocol that everybody gets. It's a cosmetic Botox. Okay, after that million people are affected with this injection, that's what they're doing. Repeated Botox exposures. And what should make everybody take pause is that the repeated Botox treatments were proven to trigger microglial activation, complement pathway upregulation, and that is just a fancy way of saying that it stimulates inflammation pathways. The complement pathway is an inflammatory, like, tag you're it. You're next. C1 goes to C2, goes to activate all these inflammatory pathways, okay? It also triggers synaptic impairment, meaning the connection between neurons, and most importantly, it triggers phosphorylated tau aggregation, and that's just your tau protein tangles that we know is a hallmark for Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative conditions. So the study showed that Botox reduced acetylcholine. That's the big deal, of course, we know, but we're trying to do that at the neuromuscular junction, but it's showing that it reduces it inside the brain. And that triggers the cascade of inflammatory responses. The microglia, like we said, is your brain's immune cells, and it becomes pro-inflammatory, releasing nitric oxide and all these inflammatory things like interleukin and tumor necrosis factor and other inflammatory molecules that end up ultimately damaging the neurons. Now, granted, this was an in vitro study, meaning that it was done in lab conditions, not on human brains, but it's the first research to model what can happen with repeated exposures. And the signal it's sending about neurodegeneration is potentially pretty hard to ignore, right? So let's talk about what we do have in actual human studies. That was all kind of the mechanistic talk. We're talking about like what's happening. That's what we just looked at with these in vitro studies. What about when we look at it, what's actually happening? People, we want some real world evidence to see that kind of information, right? And believe me, there's some studies there as well. So They're cognitive performance studies. Okay, this is the really fascinating study that was done at Bangor University. It looked at cognitive performance after facial Botox, and they found that people receiving facial Botox performed worse on non-verbal reasoning tests. So this is like your puzzles and your reasoning and thinking puzzles. So, and that was compared to your control studies. Okay, verbal reasoning was not changed, but the spatial and pattern recognition type stuff was really impacted. That's the kind that's important for integrating visual information. So, like, again, similar to like not being able to identify somebody getting angry, that is a similar thing, except in this case, it could be any visual information, a car coming at you, the order of your room, things like that. Where did I leave my paper? What am I looking at? Those are really important. Botox might actually. Okay, so what the one thing I wanted to point about this study was that it was a small study, and they couldn't find a dose kind of effect relationship. So we do need to be a little more careful with overinterpreting this, but it's the first direct evidence that we do have on how cosmetic Botox can impact certain types of cognitive function. Now, let's talk about the migraine paradox. Here's where things get a little bit complicated, and that's absolutely, I know some of you are thinking, but I get Botox for my migraines. When Botox is used therapeutically for chronic migraines, multiple studies do show improvements in cognitive measures and mood. But here's the main difference. The patients are getting relief from their debilitating migraines as a result of Botox already had impaired cognition. So when you're not suffering from chronic pain, the cognitive equation basically changes. It changes completely. What might be therapeutic for someone with severe migraines could be unnecessarily a neurological interference, interruption, damage for someone with a healthy brain. So let's talk about some real life toxicity cases, right? Of course you're asking, are there any cases? There are case studies that document long-term cognitive deficits after botulism from Botox when the toxin actually ends up spreading systemically from an injection. A 2024 study tracked patients who experienced botulism after cosmetic injections and found persistent cognitive impairments, memory problems, executive function deficits even after the botulism, the acute toxicity of it resolved. So you got paralyzed, you probably experienced some problems breathing and all the things. You probably ended up intubated. If you have acute botulism, that's what it looks like. Once that resolved, however, they still had persistent cognitive issues, and that's a problem. The reason it's concerning is there's a support group called Tox Safety that documents that over 35,000 people have reported life-threatening or debilitating systemic toxicity after Botox exposure. So these aren't isolated one or two cases. It's a pretty significant pattern. And then on top of that, we have a counterfeit problem, a counterfeit crisis problem. So when we're talking about systemic toxicity, you also got to take into account that the CDC issued a health alert in April of 2024 about botulism-like illness after counterfeit or non-healthcare setting injections. But here's where what they don't tell you. Even legitimate FDA-approved Botox can cause systemic effects when it spreads beyond the intended site. The difference between the cosmetic dose and a toxic dose isn't as wide as we'd like to think. There's individual variations as everything, and this is where medicine fails over and over, is giving a prescription that's the same dose for men and women, for example, or a 40-kilogram woman and a 100-kilogram woman, the same dose of labetalol, right? So, and then we're not even taking into account any methylation issues or any of those problems that we often talk about on this podcast that makes individual variation significantly important. And so individual variation in metabolism, injection technique, and then the cumulative exposures, they can all impact how much toxin actually reaches your brain. So let's talk about some red flags, maybe things you need to pay attention to, and what should you be watching out for if you've had Botox or are considering it. Some immediate red flags that might be important to note are any signs of systemic spread, and that includes difficulty swallowing, changes in your voice, drooping eyelids that weren't injected, double vision, generalized muscle weakness. These can all appear hours to weeks after injection, and they can require immediate medical attention. So please pay attention and act quickly in that situation. But here's some of the more subtle and often missed signs of systemic spread. New onset. So you got your Botox and you get a new onset cognitive, let's just say new onset brain fog. If you notice memory problems, difficulty concentrating, feeling fuzzy in the weeks or months that follow injection, this could actually be neurological toxicity that has been overlooked. So pay attention to that. How about the medicine interactions? I bet nobody's really talked about that. How many times does your Botox provider ask you that? I'm sure they put it on their consent form, but I don't know that it's commonly explained. Very similar to anesthesia, there are certain types of antibiotics that can impact anesthetics and muscle relaxation, and those are your aminoglycoside antibiotics. So your gentamicin, which you often get more in a dropper form, I think, than orally these days for ear infections, but even that can have an impact. So, gentamicin can have a major impact on how this breaks down. There are even some supplements that can increase your uptake of the toxin and the transport. Most injectors who do Botox don't normally do a super duper comprehensive medicine review before giving you the treatment. So it's up to you to kind of pay attention to that. Have you been on any antibiotics? Take a look and see if there's any interaction with that. You can do that on your own, but check and make sure. And what about people with existing neuromuscular problems, autoimmune conditions, genetic polymorphisms? These people may be at higher risk for systemic effects. So, but again, most cosmetic practices aren't really screening for it. You need to kind of pay attention. If you fall into any of these categories, you need to really make a point of asking your practitioner about this directly. Don't leave it for them to ask you. Okay. What about some natural alternatives? Hey guys, I wanted to pop in and interrupt our podcast to encourage you guys and let you guys know, if you didn't know, our book is available. Stephen's story about his struggle through Lyme disease. Our book, Kids Get Lyme Disease Too, One Boy's Journey of Trusting God Through Lyme Disease. It is available on all areas that you can get books, everything from Amazon to Barnes & Noble to everywhere in between. All the places that you pick up books, you can pick up our book. So please support us and get the word out. If you have a child that's struggling, it doesn't have to be Lyme. I know so many children who just feel weird because their health doesn't match that of their peers, and they feel isolated, they feel unseen, frustrated, and alone. This book is meant to encourage those children. It's meant to encourage you parents that you can get through it. It's meant to make you feel seen and heard and give you hope. So please pick up our book. Thank you so much for supporting our podcast and all the things that we do. You can see it's an ever emerging thing. I'm changing my studio. Today I'm wearing scrubs because this is the only time I've had to record, and I'm doing the best we can. And I appreciate that you guys are here with me at the root level, at the ground floor, as I'm trying to get information out to you guys that is valuable and hopefully life-changing, starting with the book. So pick up the book wherever you can pick up books, and thank you in advance for all your support. this is where I love to talk. You know, you guys, I want you guys to have the tools to do the thing, to stay beautiful and stay healthy. Like, you do not have to sacrifice being beautiful and reducing your rate of aging. Heck, this is the Brain Health and Longevity podcast. So we want you to know how to improve your longevity, and that means improving your beauty longevity, your how you present to the world. You can obviously tell that I don't use Botox by just looking at me. But I do have tools that I use to work to protect my rate of aging. I don't just let it go. I don't think that that's not what I'm advocating here, and I'm not encouraging you to do it either. So, let's talk about that for a second. What are some things we can do instead? Of course, I love to tell people to deal with the root cause. What ages you is oxidation. What causes oxidation is toxicity. And what causes toxicity is, environment, diet, and genetics. So, facial aging often reflects kind of chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, poor sleep. Yes, ma'am, poor sleep. I see you, 40-year-old woman. I hear you. I feel you in my bones. Okay. I know you're having a hard time sleeping. And poor sleep has multiple variables, and we do need to address it, and we will talk about it in future podcasts. But how can you address your sleep to help you reduce aging? It is your number one biohacking tool, sleep. Sleep is. And what are we looking for? 7 to 8 hours. 7 to 8 hours. Nutritional deficiencies lead to rapid aging. Hormone imbalances do as well. This is huge. Once I balanced my hormones, my skin stopped being crepey. It was a big deal. My husband would look at me and he would say, honey, you're kind of pruny. You need to drink more water. And I had, by this point, drunk a lot of water. Okay. So it wasn't that I wasn't hydrating, is that my body wasn't able to use the hydration because my hormones were imbalanced. And that's a big piece. So when we address some of those big root causes, we often find improvements in our skin quality that go way beyond any injection that you can achieve. So what about anti-inflammatory nutrition? What are things that we can do for that? This is really important. We talk about omega-3 fatty acids when we're talking about this. In my upcoming book, I have a whole chapter on nutrition, and I am encouraging you to interact with that. I'm working on a cookbook supplement for that as well. That is powerful. Paleo Mediterranean combos are a very powerful combination for anti-inflammatory approaches to your diet. So heavy and fatty acids, lots of polyphenols. You're talking your blueberries and grapes. Vitamin C, antioxidants that support your collagen synthesis from the inside out. We talked about sleep optimization. I already told you about that. So we'll just skip that, except for the point that, poor sleep quality accelerates your facial aging more than any other factor. More than any other factor. I wish I knew that when I was 20. I would not have cheated my sleep. And then there's some other things you can do, like red light therapy, which has really solid research in the improvement of collagen production and cellular energy and skin elasticity. I use my near-infrared red light mask at least once a day, either at night or in the morning, sometimes both. And this has been very, very helpful in reducing fine lines and wrinkles. The clinical studies are showing that you're looking for about a 660 to 850 nanometer wavelength in these type of near infrared masks and panels. So I have both in my home, and I encourage you to look into it. I will leave you guys a link in the show notes that will give you a discount on them. I have done a lot of research. Every product that I recommend is usually recommended because they're the best in the safety. They have proven their research. They're not just woo-woo. They don't put off EMFs. I'm looking for that. I'm looking for the extra toxicity that's caused by some of these products, which there's a lot of that happens, especially in infrared saunas. And then I'm also looking for example, when it comes to like the Aura ring, which a lot of people use. I don't use Aura because Aura sells your data to the World Health Organization. So I am a big fan of keeping as much of your what you have left to have private, keeping it as private as possible. So I recommend the Ultra Human Ring that protects your privacy and doesn't sell your biometric data to any agency. In fact, that's one of their biggest claims to fame. I have a link to that one as well in the show notes, so feel free to look at that. But these are big things to kind of keep in, and that's hard to navigate as a consumer. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you. All right. So what are other things you can do to improve wrinkles? Let's get back on track. Myofascial work. Myofascial work. Myofascial release is very powerful for circulation and lymphatic, muscle tone. It's actually also very good for emotional and trauma processing. So very powerful, especially in the face. Wow. Who knew, right? But it does improve fine lines and wrinkles. And so, I have nothing I'm recommending here is costing you over $5,000 here. Nothing, not even close. So we're looking at a gua sha stone. I like the stone because it's cooling, especially if you can get a quartz stone. It's really nice. Gua sha, facial cupping, you can do some facial exercises that improve things. I do that as well. I have to work to strengthen certain muscles in my face that when we don't do that, we actually just fall into patterns that cause wrinkles. So, jaw thrusting and moving your eyes and things like that all really keep your facial tone healthy and actually prevent wrinkling, which is really impressive. Of course, we know that there is targeted supplementation that really works to support collagen. And this is where we're talking about like your vitamin C, silica, biotin, collagen peptides. These are important. They do work best when combined with, of course, lifestyle interventions, not as an isolated supplement. So don't expect collagen, vitamin C, silica, and biotin to work if you don't sleep. If you're sleeping less than 6 hours a day, every single day, or you smoke or you drink a ton. Okay, well, you're just stoking fire constantly. And though this is probably slowing your rate of aging, it's not slowing the rate of aging. Does that make sense? You probably are kind of offsetting a little bit from the major amount of toxicity that you're causing with that kind of lifestyle. I would just even put in there eating fast food and garbage trash food. That's all that's as bad as smoking and drinking. So, these type of things accelerate aging. So you can take all the collagen you want. It's not going to reverse your aging or slow it drastically. You're still going to age at a faster rate than your peers. Okay. So start with those interventions. Start with the lifestyle, cut out the crap. If you're smoking, quit. If you're drinking, let's bring it down, way down, and let's get rid of any fast foods and let's get that 80-20 rule back in where we 80% healthy organic foods at home and 20% we allow for community building. And so we're not being, we're missing out on life because we're not, because we're so fussy about our food, right? The 80-20 rule is my rule. But let's also talk about what we put on your skin. I remember when a product line, when Rodan and Fields came out, man, it exploded, right? It exploded because it worked. It worked very well at reversing aging. The problem with Rodan and Fields, and I looked at it and believe me, I contemplated. I'm like, oh, I'm getting wrinkles. Maybe I should take some. I couldn't bring myself to do it because the ingredients were very clearly toxic. They used a lot of chemical agents, and I just didn't want to sacrifice my endocrine system to something that worked against aging. So I just rode with it. But in recent years, we've had a lot more developments in the clean skincare line that actually, like Arena, that actually works in the anti-aging world. So what I found in the past was that there was a lot of clean skincare, but it wasn't anti-aging skincare. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like there's tons of skincare out there, but they're usually geared for the 30 and under, and not for the mature age that's starting to actually deal with loss of collagen. And so it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I discovered a Korean skincare line called Raman, and I really, really think they're a great company when it comes to clean non-toxic, they actually work, low chemical burden, super hydrating. And of course, it's Korean skincare. Who can't beat it? Okay. It's the #1 selling skincare line in Korea. So that should tell you something. But that's the one I use. That's the one I recommend. I'll put it in the show notes for you so you have it. But I'm sure there are others on the market, but that's the one I tend to lean for myself. How about detox and heat therapy? Anti-aging really, again, is about the oxidation and the toxic burden. So when we start detoxing, your skin heals. Your skin is your largest detoxification organ. And when those are overwhelmed, your detox organ of your skin is overwhelmed, it accelerates aging, inflammation, and that crepey skin that my husband always likes to, or used to like to point out. He told me today that I looked amazing. And he'll tell me the truth, and I'm asking him to tell me the truth. So don't think he's being mean to me. I'm asking for it. But let's talk about sauna. Right? We had a podcast on sauna. It is absolutely one of the most underutilized anti-aging tools we have. On top of that, I remember a client telling me that it's like their personal GLP-1 sauna therapy. So it boosts your metabolism and it reduces aging. It's massively powerful. Infrared's my preferred because it's when you sweat out using infrared sauna, you're actually sweating toxin-rich sweat, whereas the traditional high heat sauna tends to sweat more like water weight out, which makes you look thinner faster, but it doesn't detox you as well. And over time, using infrared, you'll lose the water weight as well. So don't worry. But that does the main thing is that sauna promotes the steep detoxification through sweat. It improves circulation. It stimulates growth hormone. It activates heat shock proteins, as you know. It may be from listening to me talk. And it repairs cellular damage. There are studies that show people who use saunas 4 to 7 times a week have significantly lower biological aging markers like your telomere length. Supporting your body's natural detox pathways is really important when you're doing sauna. You need to have proper hydration, fiber support, liver support, and electrolyte balance when you do sauna. That all helps and can have a huge and very profound impact on the skin quality that no injection can replicate. How about stress? Stress regulation is absolutely crucial. Chronic stress obviously increases your cortisol levels. And now, stress isn't bad in of its own. It's what creates neuroplasticity, resilience in our cells. So when we work out, we are stressing our bodies and we are making them stronger. Same thing happens with our brains. So stress on its own is not bad, but unabated stress is the problem. So that absolutely increases aging. So if we're dealing with a period of very high stress, I would encourage you to look into doing some breath work, some gentle stretching. They're not just wellness trends, believe me. They are actually anti-aging tools with solid research for a decade. In some cases longer. Infrared sauna has been studied for over 50 years. So if you do choose to do Botox, let's talk about that. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to provide information so you can rethink what you think you know and make better informed decisions. So say you decide you're going to continue with Botox. Let's minimize the risk as much as possible. Okay. Number 1, vet your provider and the product they use obsessively. Make sure you're getting genuine onabotulinum toxin A from an FDA-approved supply chain. Avoid the Botox parties, or discount providers. Yes, I said avoid the discount providers. Go conservative with dosing and frequency. The problem I've seen with Botox is that once you start injecting, the interval between your next injection actually starts to get shorter as your body adapts to being paralyzed and the neurotransmitters alter as a result of being paralyzed. So you end up having to get them closer and closer together, and that becomes a problem. So use the lowest effective dose, extend those intervals as much as possible. Some people try to maintain results with treatments every even every 6 to 8 months instead of every 3 to 4. That's a huge difference in cumulative exposure. Stack your lifestyle interventions. Use natural approaches we discussed to reduce your dependence on toxins, on the botulinum, on the Botox toxin. Okay. So in other words, do all the things I just mentioned above and do your Botox. And that way you get more bang for your buck. You're actually working on a natural way to support your body while getting your Botox. And then maybe you don't need to get it as often. You'll start to see more exponential benefits as your body starts to reverse its aging and the telomeres start to lengthen. Your biological age starts to improve and get younger. Monitor your body for cognitive symptoms. That's a really important thing. I don't care if you just do it on your notes page on your phone, but keep a journal where you're actually being real honest about cognitive changes. Let's bring it back to a big picture. Let's talk about beauty culture. In the longevity space, even in holistic circles, beauty culture is a thing. I really want to leave you here sitting with this idea. We're living in a culture that has normalized injecting yourself with one of the most potent neurotoxins known to science for purely cosmetic reasons. It's like we've been told it's like just like getting your hair done, right? Or it's completely safe. But the research we've discussed today obviously shows that it's not just like getting your hair done. Every time you inject botulinum toxin, you're conducting an experiment on your nervous system. There's a kind of a paradox, and we touched on it a minute ago when it comes to younger kids. I can't believe I have kids. Younger folks, younger ladies, younger men even, who are trying to use Botox as preventative. It's particularly concerning to me that there is actually a lot of people in their 20s and 30s doing, quote, preventative Botox. We're talking about decades of repeated neurotoxin exposure during the peak neuroplasticity and brain development years. Your brain isn't fully formed until 25. So you're getting injections in your 19, 20, 21. You're affecting your neuroplasticity for your life going forward. That's a big deal, not a small thing to consider. And we're all about neuroplasticity here on this channel. So of course I'm going to say this is not good. Don't do it. But the main reason I say that is because there's zero long-term studies on people who start injecting themselves in their 20s for 30 to 40 years. We have no studies. And there's probably a reason for that. This is a big dollar industry. What did we say? It's burgeoning to $11 billion industry by 2031. Yeah, nobody wants to get rid of Botox if you're in the industry making lots of money on it. And I get it. This is consumerism, people. So, we are literally conducting with this the preventative Botox, culture. We're really conducting at least massive uncontrolled experiment on an entire generation. And I think it's terrible. I'm not a big fan. So I want to leave you with a challenge that the idea that aging is inherently a negative thing, or that wrinkles are a sign of failure, or maybe not even just failure. I understand it. I'm 46 today. Today's my birthday. And I'm just going to air later, but hey, it's my birthday. I think the question is really, do wrinkles and aging make us start to feel less valued, more, there's a word for it and I'm having a hard time finding it. What we say is less important. Who we are is less important to the world around us because we're somehow old now, right? So I think that's a mindset and culture that needs to shift. And I think it needs to start with us thinking that we're becoming antiquated, I guess. So what if we reframed aging as a sign of being fully alive? What if those wrinkles represent the joy of having 5 children and living and laughing and crying with them? What if we really found that to be a beautiful thing? I think that we can see this shift happen if we fully think through this and embrace it the way we have embraced clean living, organic food, regenerative farming, and all the beautiful things that I encourage you guys to look into on this channel. Like, what if we actually focus our energy more on optimizing our health span rather than just our youth span, right? Our health span means how long we live well. So we want our health span to match our chronological lifespan, right? We don't want to die at 70 and have been sick for 15 years. We want to die at 110 and be alive till the moment we go home to Jesus, right? That's the thing. So that's the difference. We are looking for health span to match our lifespan, not just chasing a youth span, keeping ourselves beautiful for as long as possible by then sacrificing our health span. So the most people I know are, they aren't beautiful because they look 25 or look 25 at the age of 45. They're beautiful because they radiate vitality and authenticity. And that comes from taking care of your mind, doing the work, the trauma work, the emotional work, the self-exploration, and even the physical work of improving your health, not paralyzing your facial muscles. So ask yourself this: does repeatedly injecting a neurotoxin make you feel more empowered or less empowered? Are you making the choice from a place of self-love or self-rejection or self-criticism? There's no judgment here. I have had Botox, obviously don't anymore, but I have had it. And I am not here to sit in judgment. I am just encouraging you guys to reflect on the way I have and continue to do. I have to repeat this story to myself. I have to remind myself of the things I'm just reminding you of. So I want you to learn what I've learned, that true confidence comes from feeling strong, healthy, and aligned with your values. It does not come from a syringe. Now, let's be honest about what we don't know, because that's crucial for making informed decisions. There is some research that is missing, and I do want to be honest here with this. We do need some long-term prospective studies that follow people who inject themselves with Botox for decades. We need that information. We don't have it. We need more cumulative dosing studies. We need to understand individual genetic variabilities, which that information is starting to come, and that helps us already identify how people react to toxins. This is a toxin, so how does that impact things? We need studies that look at cognitive function in healthy people versus people who've gotten Botox for a long time, not just migraine patients or acute toxicity cases. There is also a regulatory blind spot. And then a regulatory blind spot that really probably should concern everyone listening. Cosmetic Botox is regulated very differently than therapeutic Botox. I mean, I've seen people get Botox injections in their bladder, in the operating room, and in other areas of their body for cerebral palsy. That's a therapeutic form of Botox, not cosmetic Botox. The safety surveillance that is used for cosmetic Botox is less robust. The dosing guidelines are less specific, and the training requirements for injectors is pretty minimal, believe me. Some things to keep an eye on that you might want to pay attention to is there's research. There's no research right now, but there's research being recommended on people with genetic polymorphisms, your SNPs that impact, your COMT mutations, your MTHFRs, and things like that, and beyond that, that can affect botulism toxin metabolism. We are starting to understand that some people are genetically predisposed to systemic toxicity. That is not surprising. And there's also studies coming that look at more neuroimaging, advanced neuroimaging that tracks long-term brain changes in cosmetic users. That is coming, that's underway, and it's going. So keep an eye out for that information. And don't be afraid to ask hard questions of your practitioners on these type of things. So ultimately, what do we do with all this information? You'd think I'd leave it at the rethinking our beauty, right? But no, I want to leave you with really kind of the science to rethink your things. This is a Rethink It podcast. We're going to rethink it. If you're currently using Botox, I want you to document your baseline. Keep your cognitive health journal, like I said, noting your memory, your focus, your mood, any neurological symptoms. Try to expand or extend your intervals like we talked about. Optimize your health foundation. Start getting your foundation right, your gut health, your detox pathways, your sleep, your stress, your diet. And then potentially consider getting, hooked up with a qualified practitioner who can keep a tab on your comprehensive health history and understands the neurological impacts of Botox. If you are working with a chronic health, with a health practitioner, a holistic health practitioner, and you're afraid to tell them that you have Botox, I encourage you to do so and do so quickly, because this really impacts how they support you. So don't be scared. Nobody's going to judge you or get mad at you. Just do it. Just make sure that we have all the information to make the best decisions to support you. And if you are considering it, try everything else first. Give all the natural approaches at least 6 months before considering it. Be honest about your motivations. Like we talked about, is this to solve an appearance issue or is this a deeper confidence issue? Botox won't fix the confidence problem, I promise. And then also consider the long-term cost benefit. And it's not just financial, although that's a factor because this ain't cheap. And then also consider the potential neurological impacts. There's certainly emotional processing impacts here. Huge. And then for everyone, I want you to stay informed as the research evolves. And this is a rapidly changing field of information, and we'll know much more about this in even just 5 years. So just keep your eye on that, and I'll keep you informed as much as I learn. We'll probably revisit this in 2 years, but for now, I'm sorry to bring the light to the horrible, sad story about Botox being bad for you, but I'm sure you already know it, right? Definitely look into your beauty culture idea. Challenge the narrative. Challenge the narrative that profits from your insecurities. So here's my bottom line. The evidence that shows that Botox can and does impact brain function, whether that translates to long-term harm from a typical cosmetic user, is kind of still open and up for discussion. I don't encourage anybody as a brain health specialist and optimization expert to use it, but I'm not going to stop you, okay? Like, we should not be just making it carte blanche accessible for millions of people's brains without enough research, because we don't have it. We have mechanistic plausibility, meaning the research in animal studies and in vitro definitely demonstrate that there is transport to the nervous system. So it's not hard to make a leap. This is a biologic, animal studies is not, they're biological organisms like us. We have preliminary human studies that show cognitive impacts. We have emerging research that shows neuroinflammatory pathways that can contribute to neurodegeneration like dementia. And that doesn't mean that everyone who gets Botox will develop dementia, but it does mean that we need to approach this with a little more caution and respect for the complexity of the nervous system. And most importantly, we need to remember that true beauty and confidence come from health, vitality, and self-acceptance, not from being injected with a neurotoxin. So, all that. And if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who could use a little hope or be discouraged from using Botox. And if you haven't yet, come join me on Instagram at Beyond Brain Health so we can keep this conversation going, and keep an eye out for my upcoming book, Getting Over Going Under, where we discuss the impacts of anesthesia on brain health. And we will have our own website for that coming up soon, where we will be building a community to do better research and support one another as we heal from surgery and anesthesia. Otherwise, subscribe to my newsletter and be the first one to know when it's available, and participate in any future research efforts that we make in that field. And that you can do at beyondbrainhealth.com. And until next time, I want you to stay curious, stay grounded, and stay empowered.